everybody. Welcome back to Injustice for All with Judge Joe Brown. Hi, Judge.
Yeah. Hi.
So let's get into it. Dick Cheney. Today was his memorial. I always say he's a piece of shit. But can you speak a little bit about Dick Cheney's legacy before we get into the meat of your topic?
Dick, George, and Barry. They're all cousins. Dick Cheney, Barack Obama, aka Barry Soetoro, uh, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Walker Bush. They're all cousins. Also, Sarah Palin, governor, a former governor of Alaska and running mate to John McCain, who was Barack Obama's opposition. Also, cousin to Warren Buffett, the billionaire, and Brad Pitt, the actor. Interesting family.
Well, let's get into Dick Cheney's corruption.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really have much good to say. Well, I don't have much. There's nothing I can say about him that I would consider good. So I'm just keeping my mouth shut. Don't speak ill of the dead, and just about anything I'd say about him other than his genealogy, which I don't like either, since I am not fond of any of the individuals named, except maybe Brad Pitt as an actor. He's good at that. Other than that, I don't have much good to say about the family. Now, you can drop back a generation to George Herbert Walker Bush's daddy, Prescott Bush, who was Republican senator from Massachusetts. He supported Democrat President in Executive Order 1981 when Truman integrated the armed services, and he also helped Eisenhower, a Republican president, get rid of Joe McCarthy, the real idiot extremist that was trying to work the Red Scare, the communist Red Scare, very heavily. And he also notoriously, or not so notoriously, posted most of Martin Luther King's bonds when he was arrested during the civil rights era. So that family part, okay. But other than that, and they also started Halliburton through Uncle
Right. That's what I want to get to
Herbert
Dick Cheney
Walker.
and the Halliburton. Listen, he. So here's a couple of allegations, right, regarding Dick Cheney. Nigerian bribery scandal. Halliburton's subsidiary, Kellogg Brown and Root, was found to have paid over $180 million in bribes to Nigerian officials between 1994 and 2004 to secure lucrative contracts for a natural gas plant. Self-enrichment on contracts. Critics accuse Cheney of using his government contacts to enrich Halliburton and himself, utilizing a revolving door between public and private enterprises, i.e., no bid contracts related to the Iraq War, leading to accusations of crony capitalism. Bush administration scandals, PLAM affair, PLAME. Vice President Cheney's chief of staff, Louis Scooter Libby, was found guilty of perjury and obstruction of justice. Perjury, and obstruction of justice for his role in leaking the identity of CIA operative Valerie Plum, seemingly as retaliation for her husband's public criticism of the Bush administration's Iraq intelligence. So, I mean,
weapons of mass distinction, that outright lie perpetrated on the American public. So the Bush Cheney family enterprise set up by Uncle Herbie Walker, that is, Halliburton, could get the contract to exploit Iraqi oil. That's probably why we got involved with Iraq in 2003. Halliburton was in a bid war with France and Russia to get the oil exploitation rights in Iraq, and Hussein signed a contract with the French and the Russians and cut Halliburton out. So equally the nephew of George Herbert Walker. That would be Cheney and Herbert Walker. George Herbert Walker, excuse me, George Herbert, excuse me, George Walker Bush, the second Bush president, and Dick Cheney both had the same Uncle Herbie, who set up the Bush family fortune through Zapata Oil and Zapata Offshore Oil. And what wound up happening is they went to war with the outright lie uh, that was perpetrated on the American public of weapons of mass destruction. So, what wound up happening after a lot of people died and suffered was in 2007, Halliburton got the right to exploit Iraqi oil without a bid this time. And on last check, 2008, they were netting between 2.4 and 2.8 million dollars every 7 hours of the day. Now multiply how many times seven is in 365 days. That is 7 hours. 24 hours times 365 divided by 7, and multiply 2.4 to 2.8 million dollars, and that's how much money they were making back then off of what they suckered the American public into doing behind the lie of weapons of mass destruction.
And he was the mass destructor.
Yeah, they used to say that Cheney was a flunky of the Bushes. No, he wasn't. He was the older cousin of George Walker Bush and the slightly younger cousin of George Herbert Walker Bush. I mean, we're all cousins to Sarah Palin, who was Dick Cheney's, not Dick Cheney's, who was John McCain's running mate when he ran against cousin Barry Soetoro, also known as Barack Obama.
Well, it says here too, Cheney was a leading advocate for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Often,
Yeah, he wanted his company to get what they got
mm,
4 years later, which was without bid, a contract that netted the company 2.4 to 2.8 million dollars every 7 hours of the day. Netted, not gross, netted.
and Cheney was a proponent of expansive unitary executive theory of presidential power and advocated for enhanced integration methods, which were later deemed ineffective by a Senate report. He was also instrumental in establishing a warrantless surveillance program targeting U.S. citizens.
Naturally. But in the 25 years since then, most of that is flip flopped, and you now see the Democratic Party as apt students of what went on, and they are going above and beyond the teacher.
Now, I may be a little confused, but was it Dick Cheney or was it a former Supreme Court justice that accidentally shot and killed a man while they were hunting? You remember that?
Nobody got killed. Somebody got peppered with bird shot.
Okay. Well, who
Very
was that?
clumsy.
Dick Cheney or
There
the fat justice
That
person?
was the Dick Cheney, and one of the justices was on that little hunting trip, and they didn't know where the hunter was who got shot, which is a no-no when you're hunting birds. He was in front of the gun line, which is a no-no when you're shooting birds, and apparently didn't have on the hunter's orange to make himself a little bit more visible, so that was bad. So it was a real mess with a bunch of bozos out there not knowing what they were doing. Now,
I
in
think it was intentional.
25 years, we have had a flip flop between what they were about and what you see the Democrats being about. And the conduit for that change was Barry Soetoro, aka Barack Obama, another one of the cousins. And the ancestor was a gentleman by the name of Samuel Hinckley, who was an indentured servant or slave who was a French Huguenot Protestant who indentured himself for quite a few decades to get transport to the New World to get away from the French Catholics. So he had 7 of his descendants were U.S. presidents. One of them, Dick Cheney, was a vice president, several U.S. governors, several U.S. senators, and it seems quite a few very rich entrepreneurs who were his descendants. Interesting. He was one of those 3/5 people in Article 1 of the Constitution.
Well, rest in pure hell, Dick Cheney. And I don't like saying that because who am I to pass judgment? But honestly, listen, now it's reports President Trump and JD Vance was snubbed from his funeral. They didn't want to go anyway. So I don't, you don't want to be aligned with that.
I don't think Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance wanted to go.
No, they did not because they
sit up there and probably most of the rhetoric that's going to be at the funeral is going to be directed at them. Remember, they are the imps of Satan. If you listen to the Democrat Party and the old line Republicans represented by Dick Cheney and George Walker Bush, I think the Lexus of incompetence in the executive branch in the United States is greatly monopolized by Bush, Cheney, Obama, Biden, Harris. I think they've got kind of corner on the market of being the best example of as bad as it can get in the executive branch. But it is what it is.
well, let's move on to immigration, right? It's a lot of So this week it came out Tennessee judge blocks the deployment of National Guard in Memphis. So a Tennessee judge on Monday,
And she's black. And she's in Nashville, not Memphis. And she also has a nice little thing where she's trying to put this conservative reporter in jail because he won't tell what cop let him copy the manifesto of the person that killed these 6 people at a private school several years ago. 3 of them were adult, 3 of them were children. And what the manifesto says is that the shooter who died in the event was very aggrieved that the school had encouraged him to be trans, and he thought it was something that had destroyed his life, and he was angry.
So it says a Tennessee judge on Monday night blocked the use of National Guard in Memphis under the crime fighting operation by President Trump, but also put the order on hold, giving government 5 days to appeal. Davidson County Chancellor Patricia had Moscow's decision sides with Democratic state and local officials who sue, contending that Republican Governor Bill Lee cannot deploy Tennessee National Guard for civil unrest unless there is a rebellion or invasion, and even then it will require action by state lawmakers. The plaintiffs also said another provision spells out a need for a request from a local government to use the guard in some scenarios, including breakdown of law and order.
The law and order I live here is as broken down as it gets. We're the 10th most dangerous city on the planet Earth and by far the most dangerous in the United States. What more can you say? And these local yokel blue jackass party types, that is what that mascot is, isn't it? It's a jackass, a donkey. Well, donkey's a jackass, so I'm using their own claim. They can't bring about public safety, order, dignity, or peaceability. There's no economy, and all they're doing is stealing from the public. So I guess their problem is that they don't want anybody here to look over somebody's shoulder, so they'll all get caught up and sent to prison. What most of them do. So I might run for mayor of Shelby County. It's coming up next November, and maybe I should run and see what happens. And I sure would bring them in. That would be the request. They've got somebody from the failed Board of Education that just announced she got fired. She couldn't handle the Board of Education. So I know she can't handle the county government. And we've got 5 Democrats running, 1 white female and 4 male blacks, and neither of them have any particular claim to fame except being hacks, and none of them has demonstrated anything that is close to being innovative in their entire sordid careers. So they just want more of the same, and I would suggest to the essentially red state of Tennessee that it needs to get behind somebody who has common sense in this area for mayor of the biggest county in the state,
Well,
and
it says here the state
in the running.
It says here the state has said Tennessee law gives governor the authority to dispatch the guard when needed and to determine when the need exists. In a statement posted on X, Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris, a plaintiff in a case, said he is pleased with the decision. The injunction does not take effect immediately, and the state has a chance to seek leave to appeal. However,
Sure, he would be happy. Lee is an ass. And Lee is implicated in a lot of misappropriation of public funds and embezzlement situations. And the lowdown clowns can't just try to wiggle out of it. They try to scapegoat other people and try to coerce them into taking a dive. So before Harris says a damn thing, he needs to clear up what his wife is trying to blackmail with him with to keep him in line. They're both law professors out at the University of Memphis. They've been that way for the 12 years they've been in the Memphis area. They've been encouraged to take pro bono cases as professors, and they've not taken one damn pro bono case the entire time they've been out there, either one of them. So 4th-tier law school. It is about what it's about. And I'm not very impressed by the whole thing, except by their ignorance and their criminality. So I'm not surprised. And Tavis, well, I won't even get into the names of the rest, but every one of them needs a target put on their back. Is turn them out the next time they run for anything, because they don't need to be in there. They want to get rid of, they want to protect us from this evil fascist known as Donald Trump in D.C., but turn loose theft and death in the streets of Memphis. Real nice, fools.
well,
Excuse me, you damn fools.
damn fools. Let's go to the Supreme Court, to SCOTUS, right? When it comes to the National Guard deployment. When the Trump administration asked the court on October 17th to pause an order from a federal judge in Illinois permitting the National Guard deployment, it appeared that the justices would issue their decision in a matter of days. Justice Amy Coney Barrett instructed lawyers for Illinois and Chicago to respond to administration's request by 5 p.m. August 20th, putting the case on a much more condensed timeline than most interim docket matters. More than a week went by, however, before the court addressed the briefs, and its response on October 29th wasn't a decision. It was a request for new briefs on the law that Trump invoked when ordering the deployment. Specifically, the court asked whether the law, which allows a president to call the National Guard into federal service when they are unable to execute the laws of the United States with regular forces, is referring to the regular forces of the U.S. military.
Yeah, in other words, the 1977 Act is kind of poorly drafted, which is not surprising considering the composition of the House and the Senate at the time. And the way you can take a reading of it is before you can call in the National Guard, you have to send the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps in first, and they aren't supposed to be able to handle the situation. Then you call in the Guard. But in Tennessee, what's going on that this person in that stayed this is 240 miles away from Memphis in Nashville and gets elected by a small constituency in the Nashville area, doesn't have to stand for election in the Memphis area. She's Democratic, and that gets the local yokels away from to having to be answerable to the people. And the problem is they didn't even sue Trump and the feds. They sued the governor of the state of Tennessee, the commander of the National Guard, and the attorney general for the state of Tennessee. Now, the attorney general, commander of the National Guard, and the governor are the ones that sent the National Guard into Memphis. They also have the Tennessee state troopers here, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. They have ICE here. They have ATF here. They have DEA here. And what they're complaining about is some National Guardsmen who were about to be made legit because the U.S. Marshal was going to make them deputy U.S. Marshals. So the crime has gone way down. You can drive all around the town after midnight, like I've been doing the last several weeks, and you don't hear gunfire on a regular basis. The streets are a lot tamer. People are coming back out. They're feeling safer, and these idiots want to condemn everybody to theft and death so they can defeat evil Donald Trump that the governor is supposed to be trying to pander to. But the governor is termed out and has no ambition to run for president or U.S. senator, though the U.S. senator here, a woman, is running for governor to replace the now termed out Republican governor. Her name is Marsha Blackburn, excuse me. And I knew somebody, Marsha Blake, excuse me. She's been dead quite a while. But anyway, it's interesting what's going on. And by the way, I'm supporting that candidate for governor. So
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's going to be an interesting mess by the time it gets resolved. And I think some
the
people are
immigration,
not going to get back in office.
right. Well, it says both sides. So I just want to finish reading this part. Both sides filed their new briefs on November the 10th. U.S. Solicitor General D. John Sawyer contended that regular forces refers to civilian law enforcement officers and that courts should give extraordinary deference to Trump's decision to send the National Guard to protect federal officials in Chicago rather than standing military. For their part, lawyers for Illinois and Chicago argued that regular forces refer to the full-time professional military and that therefore Trump had not satisfied the conditions laid out in the law before federalizing and deploying the National Guard. Sawyer and the lawyers for Illinois and Chicago filed what are thought to be their final briefs in the case, responded to arguments made in November 10th brief. The Supreme Court can now act at any time.
You know, it's absolutely absurd for somebody to say that regular U.S. forces were supposed to be, you send in the Army and the Marines before you send in the National Guard, considering that the early history of the United States of America was replete with many, many, many sanctions and problems that they had with the concept of a standing military. They were totally against it, which is why the American Constitution reads in effect like it does. Police hadn't been invented and wouldn't be invented for another 50 some years after the fact in England, that's Scotland Yard. by Sir Robert Peel, which is why they're known as bobbies or peelers. And
Hmm.
the National Guard wasn't an invention. That wasn't until the turn of the 20th century when the militia started getting converted over to units, guard units, National Guard units that could be mobilized under certain conditions by the U.S. president and made part of the U.S. military armed forces. Before that, you relied upon state militias or local militias that were societies uh, that just assembled to drill and play with guns for a hobby. And then when time was called on that, you needed them for real, they served with distinction on both sides of the Civil War. So
Right.
these people that talk about the intention was to bring in the army first, no, that doesn't fly with American history. And I would be more prone to say that the appropriate reading would be FBI, Secret Service, Treasury agents outside of the Secret Service, DEA, TSA, ICE, Border Patrol, things like that. And when you can't deal with an issue with them, then you bring in something bigger because there is no sane position that would say that a major government is supposed to find itself helpless in the face of public disorder that is beyond the ken of local agencies.
So let's go to birthright citizenship briefly. President Trump's executive order limiting access to birthright citizenship, the Justice Department claims, sorry, President Trump's executive order limiting access to birthright citizenship, the Justice Department claims that the government's policy will bring the United States in line with the modern global trend. It is true that most countries do not grant citizenship at birth to people born within their borders with as few restrictions as the United States. But this isn't new. The United States has been a global outlier since the 14th Amendment was added in the U.S. Constitution in 1868. Understanding which countries grant citizenship primarily based on location of birth and which don't helps make sense of the 127-year approach that the Justice Department is asking the court to reconsider. This also reveals the troubling history of why certain countries have chosen not to recognize birthright citizenship in the first place. Trump's birthright citizenship order, which denies U.S. citizenship to children born in the United States based on the citizenship or immigration status of their parents, has faced legal challenges since shortly after the president signed it in January. In June, the court weighed in on the administration's side regarding a technical albeit, ALBEIT. How do you pronounce that?
Albeit.
Albeit. Albeit important.
Albeit.
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 Oh, albeit important procedural issue. And over the past 5 months, courts considering a new round of lawsuits have uniformly concluded that the executive order is likely illegal. In its petition asking the court to review decisions from two federal courts, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and the U.S. District Court for the District of New Hampshire, the Justice Department argues that broad access to citizenship at birth degrades and dilutes U.S. citizenship. Presumably, for those reasons, hardly any developed country retains a theory of citizenship similar to United States. The
Can I
U.S.
cut through the fog here?
Yeah, I just wanted to finish this quote, and that quote was by the U.S. Solicitor General D. John Sawyer.
Let me
That was his petition to the government.
let me translate. The reason we have that language in the 14th Amendment that establishes birthright citizenship is because there was a U.S. Supreme Court case written by one of the worst assholes to ever put on a bat cape, Cheney, Chief Justice, who wrote the Dred Scott decision. The Civil War was over, had been fought. The slaves had been freed universally under the 13th Amendment in those areas where it had been ratified. At the time, the 14th came for ratification. And the problem is the Dred Scott decision was still good law in the United States of America, and it said essentially that a Negro could not be a citizen of the United States of America. So the specific language that is now taken as birthright citizenship was to address the specific holding of the Dred Scott case, which was from the 1850s, but was still good law after the Civil War and after the 13th Amendment had been adopted. So that birthright citizenship thing went to two categories of people: Native Americans, known as American Indians, Amerins, and former slaves. So the fact that it has been put in play for something else in the years that have passed is not unusual. For example, the 15th Amendment was clearly written for the benefit of the former slaves, but within 10 to 12 years, they had turned the 15th Amendment into a device to establish and sustain the concept of a corporation being a person entitled to all of the rights of a real person. So that's how we got corporate America set on its feet, was through the 15th Amendment that was not drafted for their benefit, but for the benefit of the former slaves. So that's the same thing with what happened with the language in the 14th Amendment that was specifically intended to reverse the Dred Scott decision. And
So I
so
want
it's
to I
been
want to
taken
read.
way out of hand. So now we have it applying to a category of people that nobody anticipated protecting. In other words, you crashed the American border, you are a criminal. And if you manage to get knocked up by having sex, quite often on the taxpayer's dollar, and you have a baby, then the baby becomes automatically a U.S. citizen. That wasn't what they intended this thing to do.
Right. I want to read what that solicitor, John Sawyer, his argument, right? So the solicitor's general claim isn't so much incorrect as it is misleading. Sawyer doesn't cite any source or give any examples, so it is impossible to be sure which countries he considers developed. Germany, Japan, and most Nordic countries, for example, historically relied on biological relationships to determine citizenship. In practice, a citizen's child would obtain citizenship at birth based on the parent-child relationship, even if the child was born outside the country of citizenship. It's called jus sanguinis, Jus, second word sanguinis, a Latin term meaning right of blood.
Sanguineous, blood.
Thank you. What
Juice sanguineous, by
What
right of blood.
matters, yeah, what matters most under these citizenship practices, which remain common, is a child's genetic inheritance. Current law in the United
And you
States.
want to define what kind of state they're talking about?
What do you mean?
The countries they're talking about.
What
In
this?
other words, it's a country that can field an army in uniform, that knows how to march in ranks and in order. It has artillery, it has cavalry, or now armor, meaning tanks, and it has infantry, and it can raise hell on a battlefield, and it has recognized ranks, and it has fought a war with or against or as part of somebody's army.
Okay. Well, it says current law in the United States features, how you pronounce it again?
Jus sanguinis.
Jus sanguinis options for children born abroad to U.S. citizen. By contrast, the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause, which ties citizenship to the place of birth, is an example of a jus soli citizenship law. A Latin,
Literally, in other words, where the location is, where the
right?
sun shines, literally.
Exactly. It says Latin phrase that means right of soil. Since at least 1898, when the Supreme Court issued its decision in United States versus Wong Kim Ark, courts and executive branch agencies have interpreted the citizenship clause as granting U.S. citizenship to anyone born in the United States, except for the children of foreign diplomats, invading military forces, and Native Americans.
Now, you want to hear what the interesting thing is? It's had impacts. A lot of Japanese got uh, put in front of tribunals after World War II. Some of them were born in the United States. Their parents were new American citizens, so they got American citizenship. But because their parents were Japanese, they went to visit grandparents in Japan when December 6th hit. So the Japanese military drafted them and compelled them to serve on pain of consequences for committing treason if they did not, which was basically getting put on a wall and shot. So they served, so they had dual citizenship status, and they got tried for treason, most of whom got acquitted because of the extenuating circumstances. Or you have England's greatest prime minister, Sir Winston Churchill, whose mother was a Chicago area department store heiress and whose father was an English lord, and he had dual English and American citizenship. The American citizenship he renounced so he could become Sir Winston, but he could claim both places. It happens. Uh, it's called what happens is if you're born on American soil, and American soil by international law includes consulates, embassies, military, and naval bases. It includes territories, protectorates, it includes zones like the Canal Zone used to be, or if you just happen to get birthed in the middle of a bridge and you're on the American side, that's an American territory. Washington, D.C., or places like that, American Samoa, the American Virgin Islands, which would include Puerto Rico and places like that. Abraham Lincoln was born in an American territory, Illinois, which was a territory at the time. President Andrew Jackson was born in the territory of Tennessee, which was part of the territory of North Carolina and still has part of North Carolina's common law is part of its body of law. So, I mean, it wasn't unusual. People were born in California and Texas when it was a territory or even a foreign place at one point for California and Texas. You have Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, all of those places were at one time territories, and
Right.
you know,
So here's my last question on this, right? Because I learned some Latin. Just sanguinis,
by blood,
but
law of blood.
did I pronounce it right?
Nobody's spoken Latin for 1,500 years. So who the hell knows? I guess there's some
Well,
convention.
you said it better. I like the way
Instead
you
of A-E-I-O-U, the way we do vowels, it goes R-A-E-O-U for most of the rest of the world, and that's for Romance languages. And Romance languages mean the Romantic languages, which are Latin.
oh,
So I guess you would pronounce them commensurate with how you deal with the vowel sounds in French,
okay,
Spanish, Portuguese, Italian.
right.
Spagnolo,
Well,
Italiano, e
I
francese.
just I just want to focus on these two terms, just sanguinis and just soli,
So
right of
where
soul.
the sun shines, actually,
Right.
that's
So just sanguinis, right of blood. just solely or soul
Would
right
be
to the land.
jus sanguinis. Jus, juice.
Juice.
Hmm.
Juice.
Yeah.
Sanguineness. Sanguineness. Sanguineness.
Don't
Juice.
worry about it. Just about right.
I want to learn it, but okay. But
Nobody,
here's my
even
point.
in law, owns the assholes.
Okay, but here's the point that I'm trying to make here, right? So juice san, I'll just do it for short, and
Sanguinis.
juice san, and
So
juice soul.
that's right
Which
of soil and right of
right?
blood.
Let me just come on. Let me just say this. Juice soul is what the 14th Amendment and our Constitution practice.
We do both.
We
In other
do both,
words,
but
if
more
your
so,
parent is an American citizen, particularly if it's female, since you know who one of the parents is. If your mother's female, it doesn't make any difference. As long as she's a citizen, it doesn't make any difference where in the world you're born, you're an American citizen. If you were born on America, that's by blood. If you were born on American soil, it doesn't make any difference what your bloodline is, the way they have interpreted it. That means you are a citizen. That was to refer to all of the colored, Negro, black folk who had been born here in the continental United States from that period where they cut off slavery in 1808 in terms of importing new slaves from Africa or anywhere else. And when they were emancipated with the 13th Amendment. So, yeah, now the question just comes in is what's what, which is which.
well, juice san is for children born abroad to U.S. citizens. But in this case, when it comes to birthright citizenship that illegals have been taken advantage of, right to the soil, that is up. That is the decision that the Supreme Court has to make, and that decision is not going to be made until next year in 2026. So I just want to ask you, what?
What I think,
Yes.
I think they're going to restrict the interpretation of what they mean by American soil and what that birthright thing is referring to. They will probably go to the voluminous legislative history on the subject when it came to the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, of which it is very extensive as to what was intended. But the danger with that is they'd have to go re examine a lot of stuff in the 15th Amendment, which would have to do with corporate sanctity today, which is probably going to not happen. Now, where it goes interesting, there's only been one real consequence to all of this. And you know what it is? There is a provision in the Constitution that effectively limits the office of President of the United States and, by implication, Vice President, since that person would become the president on the death of the selected president. And that is that the person has to be born on American soil, not just be an American citizen. Um, that came up on Mr. Trump's first run for president, the second runner up for the Republican claim to the office was somebody born in Canada and under American law, technically not eligible to be president. And the reason for that is if you get into reading the Federalist Papers, which are very boring and very long, it's to prevent somebody who, in today's terms, would be called a sleeper agent. In other words, somebody whose interests were with a foreign power coming in very early and insinuating themselves into a position of becoming the commander in chief of the military of the United States and also the chief executive of this government. People didn't think the U.S. would ever be as powerful as it is right now, but you know, it is what it is.
Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Injustice for All with Judge Joe Brown.